So I'm interested in your definition of anti-Zionism, because the idea that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism has been a fairly controversial claim, even within the ADL. How do you square that statement, which is fairly absolutist, with the reality that there are plenty of people, including Palestinians, obviously, Israelis and Jews across the world, who obviously harbor no ill will towards the Jewish people, but do consider themselves anti-Zionists?
Well, look, maybe the term is misunderstood because I don't want to impugn the motives of everyone who might self-define that way.
Right, because I think a lot of people who are, Palestinians who were exiled in 1948, their descendants, people that live in the West Bank or Gaza in deplorable conditions, I think we could hardly expect them to embrace a political ideology that resulted in that or be
Sure.
deemed anti-Semitic.
Well, look, absolutely. Like there was a war in 1948. The United Nations, right, declared two states. The Jews were there said, yes, we'll take it. The Arabs who were there said, we won't take it. And they fought. And there was displacement for sure. I don't expect a Palestinian who is displaced from their village or their descendants to march in the Israel Independence Day parade. But the question is not whether or not you have strong negative feelings toward Israel. I get that. But whether or not you think Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Now, that's not some abstract idea. I mean, maybe it's okay in the context of like a college seminar on 19th century philosophies of nationalism. But in the real world, the one where I live, right? The one where we're seeing this record number of anti-Semitic incidents. We're seeing this ugly manifestations in public places, in workplaces, on campuses, et cetera, and in newsrooms, quite frankly, with coverage. In that world, in the real world, even if you don't intend it, by saying things like, I'm an anti-Zionist, realize what you're saying is, I don't believe in the right Jews to have the same rights as everyone else. So you could almost imagine a world where someone says, well, look, I'm not a Zionist. I don't want to, again, march in the Israel Day parade. I get it entirely. And yet the anti-Zionist is dedicated to destroying the Jewish state. That's what that philosophy is about. So when you subscribe to that philosophy, you need to understand what it actually means. It's very possible that some people who say it don't really understand the consequences of it.
Well, but I think like
it's kind
of Palestinians and like, let's say a liberal college professor who is Jewish would self-describe as anti-Zionist and would say that they are not anti-Semitic. Is it a problem for the slogan that it labels all those people as anti-Semitic? No. Does that not have the result of stifling debate or silencing those people,
no.
as they would say?
Again, you can criticize Israel all you want, but just delegitimizing the state and its citizens has real-world consequences that you need to accept. Like, if you're going to make these statements, you need to be accountable for it. I'm not saying there shouldn't be free speech on college campuses at all. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is anti-Zionism has real world repercussions. Let me put it to you like this. To say I'm anti-Zionist, but I'm not anti-Semitic, that's like saying, 1963, I'm not racist, but I'm against the civil rights movement. I'm not racist, but I think Martin Luther King should be in jail because he's, he is trying to break up society or something like that. So I want to ask you, I'll ask you the question, how would you interpret, someone might say legitimately, look, I'm not a racist, I'm just opposed to the civil rights movement. I don't think that there should be a civil rights movement for Black people in America. Like, I think literally there may be Black people who said that, I don't know, but I think we can listen to that and say, you may feel that way. That may be in your heart. You may not even intend it to be offensive, but it is. And at a time when Black people are getting beaten in the streets, when people are getting killed for fighting for civil rights, to say you're not racist, but you're opposed to the civil rights movement, that lands pretty flat.
Right.
So in the anti-Zionist, I'm not anti-Semitic. I just don't believe in the right of the Jewish state to exist. That lands pretty flat today in light of where the world is.
Well, but I would say that there's a lot of Palestinians and Jews and even Israelis who believe, let's say, that there should be a one-state solution with equal rights for all, equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. And unlike the racists in the 1950s, they're not denying civil rights to Black people. They're saying that everyone should live equally, but they just believe that the political ideology of Zionism has dealt them a really horrible hand.
Well, look, like I mean, there are certainly black people in America who could say, I think America's dealt us a pretty horrible hand. Like 400 years of slavery, plus 100 plus years of Jim Crow, plus institutional discrimination today. I think it's dealt me a pretty hard
But
hand.
right, but
That
I don't
doesn't mean
think
I
we
think
would consider them
it's great.
anti-American.
Well, but my point is that the anti-Zionist says Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Just so we're clear. So you could say it's dealt me a heavy hand, and therefore I'm going to do everything I can to undermine the legitimacy of the country. Like, you understand why that would be very problematic? And there's something else to keep in mind too. Again, we're not talking about some abstraction here. We're not talking about some hypothetical here. Again, as we've seen with Hamas, as we've seen with Hezbollah, as we've seen with the Houthis, as we've seen with Iran, and I could go on, there are nation states and their proxies who are not just dedicated to destroying the Jewish state, they're actively working to do so. So again, to the anti-Zionist who says, I don't believe Palestinians can ever get a fair shake. I don't believe that. And so therefore I'm opposed to the state. I would just say, how do you then explain all the Palestinian doctors, all the Palestinian lawyers, Palestinian Arab Muslims in the government? Like, these things don't square. So again, you might feel angry about the state that it displaced you or your ancestors. I completely get that. But so you may say, look, I don't want to support Israel. I get that too. But the anti-Zionist is dedicated, whether with intention or by dint of the outcome of their beliefs, is dedicated to destroying the state. Now, let me give you, it is. Anti-Zionism is the opposite of Jews having the same rights as Palestinians. If you believe that Palestinians have the right to self-determination, if you believe that, I believe Palestinians have the right to self-determination. I just don't believe Jews have the same right. Like, I'm sorry, that is literally the essence of discrimination. Doesn't matter if it's a Jew saying it, or a Palestinian saying it, or an atheist, or a Christian, or a Swedish person. If you would deny Jewish people the very same rights that you think Palestinians deserve, like, sorry, if that holding one or the other, it's just
Right.
wrong.
I just
Now,
don't think that
one other thing.
many anti-Zionists would consider that definition to be the one that they would ascribe to themselves.
But like, again, I mean, let me give you another example. So my wife is an Iranian Jew.
Hmm.
Her family lived in Iran for thousands of years, so they say. They trace their lineage back to when the Babylonians sacked Israel 2,000 years ago, and Cyrus the Great brought the Jews over, invited the Jews to come. The Islamic Republic comes into power after the revolution in 1979, regards Jews as enemies of the state, shuts down their schools, appropriates property, constricts their freedom of religion and other liberties, and they leave as political refugees. They escape. They wouldn't let them leave. They escaped under false papers. My wife doesn't think Iran should be destroyed. They took their things, they forced them out, they murdered their friends. If my wife were to go back, she'd be arrested on the spot. But my wife doesn't believe that the country doesn't have the right to exist. So look, Jews have been displaced. My grandfather was murdered in the Holocaust. I don't believe Germany doesn't have the right to exist. So again, let's just talk about, again, anti-Zionism is not, I'm upset about what the Nazis did to my family. Anti-Zionism is we should destroy Germany forever. Germans don't have the same rights as everyone else. Like, that's why it's, again, I'm trying to draw an analogy here and just explain why it's so deeply problematic. And again, last point I'll make. There are definitely Jews who identify as anti-Zionist. There are definitely a contingent of African Americans who are very pro-Trump. There are definitely a contingent of Hispanic people who are very anti-immigration. There is a fringe in every community with ideas that are very different from the mainstream. I spent last week on the National Mall with 300,000 other people, non-Jews for sure, but also many, many, many Jews that came from all corners of the country, all denominations, different ethnicities, different races, different levels of observance. There were people with MAGA hats and people with Pride t-shirts. And that was a breadth and a depth of our community that was amazingly diverse and representative, and there were no anti-Zionists there. So if you look hard enough, you can definitely find them, but they are the fringe. They are the fringe of our community. And so suggesting that they somehow speak for the vast majority of us is just incorrect.
My last question on this, because I know I've been harping on it, but it,
Yeah.
you seem to accept that there are exceptions to the phrase, but
Well, what do you mean
the
by
phrase,
exception?
there are exceptions like the Jewish people that you just mentioned, the Palestinians who were evicted in 1948, who we wouldn't necessarily expect to sign up for Zionism. My question is, does it not cheapen the label of anti-Semitism by labeling this entire community of Palestinians, much of the Arab world, and even Jews and Israelis who self-describe as anti-Zionist? Does it not cheapen the label of anti-Semitism to group all of those people in with hardcore anti-Semites, Nazis, etc.?
Well, look, anti-Semitism is hate. It can come from multiple directions. There can be anti-Semitism of kind of commission. There can be anti-Semitism of omission. It's just like racism. Racism is insidious. Racism takes many forms. Racism isn't something you can easily, put in a bottle or put in a box and it always looks the same. And it very well may be. I mean, we talk a lot in this country about white privilege. White people who don't even realize they are being racist, don't even appreciate the privilege that they have due to the way that they show up, the color of their skin. Doesn't mean it isn't there. Doesn't mean there aren't issues. So the fact of the matter is the anti-Semitism, not only am I not cheapening anti-Semitism by describing anti-Zionism for what it is, I'm clarifying the different manifestations of it today. I used to work for President Obama, and he used to say, maybe he still does, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So when you talk about anti-Zionism, delegitimizing the Jewish state, it rhymes with the trope of delegitimization that's been placed upon the Jewish people for 2,000 years.